Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our latest webinar. I'm Dr. Mansoor Nilikal, Community Coordinator for the Physical Science Data Infrastructure PSDI, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Let me introduce today's speaker, Dr. Samantha Piamen-Kanza. Samantha is a Senior Enterprise Fellow at PSDI, University of Southampton, and she is also the Principal Investigator for the Careers and Skills for Data-Driven Research, CASDR, and serves as the Pathfinder Lead for process recording under PSDI framework. Her research lies in the intersection of computer science and scientific practice, particularly in the use of semantic web technologies and artificial intelligence to enhance the way science is conducted and data is managed. Today, Samantha will be talking to us about the growing importance of data availability and management in modern research. She'll also introduce the emerging role of data stewards and share the vision behind her new CASDR network. So if you enjoy a good story, one with a few twists, some challenges, and maybe even a fairy tale ending, you are in the right place. So without further ado, over to you, Samantha.
Thank you very much, Mansoor, and thanks to PSDI for giving me the opportunity to come and tell this story. So I just wanted to give a bit of a note, because this is sort of half story, half presentation. I've got quite a few slides that are sort of abstract pictures just to sort of highlight the concepts I'm actually talking about. But there will actually be a full copy with all the text available on Zenodo, as I appreciate that the pictures are nice, but not as useful if you're looking at it after the fact. So don't worry, those words will actually come out. But for now, sit back, relax. Hope you will have a nice cup of tea and enjoy my story. So before we embark on our daring adventure of data stewardship, I just wanted to give you a bit of a heads up about what we're going to talk about first. So I'm going to tell you a bit about me, the storyteller. Then we're going to go through a fair data story. So we're going to introduce our lovely characters, the Fair Data Witch, Data Cat, and our Data Steward sorceresses. And I'm going to use sort of this guise of this story to talk through the deep complexities of actually enacting fair, and explain why data stewards are so important in their roles across the whole data lifecycle. And then I'm going to tell you about CASDR and about our plans and how we're actually planning to support and progress data stewardship. So a bit about me. I couldn't resist giving myself a witch's hat to go in line with the fairy tales. But as Mansoor said, I'm a Senior Enterprise Fellow at the University of Southampton. I wear quite a few different hats for my job. So, but obviously the main two being the Principal Investigator of Careers and Skills for Data-Driven Research and the Pathfinder Lead on Process Recording for PSDI. So a bit of background, I must confess, despite working in PSDI and having worked in the physical sciences for a long time, I'm not actually a scientist. I'm certainly not actually a chemist. I'm a computer scientist. By trade, I did a computer science undergraduate degree. And then after a brief stint in industry where I worked out the corporate world wasn't entirely for me, I sprinted full speed back into academia and I did a web science PhD. So web science is a really cool subject because it's an interplay between computer science and sociology, and it looks at the importance of the human element of technology and views technology as the web, socio-technical concepts that actually where the human intervention and the human usage is just as, if not more important than the technology itself, and this kind of drives how this technology evolves. Now, I mention this because a lot of my work around process recording, Electron Lab notebooks, data management, data stewardship, they all sort of really focus on this fact. So I firmly believe that if we're going to progress forward with data and technology to its fullest potential, we should never be writing humans out of the loop, and we really need that human element. So that's just my initial bit of soapbox rant, and now I'm going to start our story. So I'm going to start where every good fairy tale starts. Once upon a time, in the vast and ever-expanding research kingdom, a magical force called data began to grow at an exponential rate. It sparkled with immense potential, promising to unlock secrets of the universe, underpin magical spells, and build upon previously unimagined wonders. However, all was not well in the research kingdom. Although this data multiplied faster than an enchanted forest being sent after you by an evil queen, it was scattered across the research kingdom, hiding in unreachable towers, forgotten caves, and within dusty scrolls buried deep in the magical archives. Brave scholars and curious scribes searched far and wide, desperately seeking these vital datasets, but sadly, many of them could not be found. And even when they thought they'd found something they were looking for, inevitably, much like Prince Mario, they discovered that what they were actually looking for was somewhere else altogether. And even when scrolls were uncovered, their language was often cryptic. Things were written in unintelligible symbols and codes that only a few people actually understood. So this knowledge of the ancients, instead of guiding the future, lay dormant and remained misunderstood. And thus the kingdom suffered. Brilliant magical discoveries faded into the past, and the same spells were cast again and again, never actually building upon the magical lore that came before. But one day, a spark of hope emerged. Having heard of the Research Kingdom's plight, the queen of the distant and orderly land of Metadatia sent one of their wisest and most organised consorts, the fair Data Witch, to visit the kingdom. Filled with a determined purpose to spread the wisdom of Metadatia's vision of kingdom-wide, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data, she declared, "No more shall knowledge be lost in the shadows. Let every piece of data be findable, every scroll accessible, every language interoperable, and every discovery reusable." You see, the witch had a cunning plan. So cunning, you could stick a tail on it and call it Salem Saberhagen. She introduced Metadatia's law to ensure that all of the data across the Research Kingdom could be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And this plan was met by uproars of praise and delight. Finally, the scholars and scribes of the Research Kingdom had been shown a way to pass on their magical discoveries to the next generation, enabling spell reuse and a new wave of building upon the magical lore of the ancient scholars past. The Fair Witch was delighted with this opportunity to share her fair principles with the Research Kingdom and pretty much thought that was job done. She was on the verge of mounting her broomstick back to the land of Metadatia, where she came across a clever and curious creature called Data Cat, who stopped her in her tracks. Data Cat was beloved by scholars and scribes alike, known for curling up beside glowing scrolls and purring softly when the data was clean. And believe me, they had learnt to give her a wide berth if their data was subpar. Data Cat had wandered the halls of the Research Kingdom for years, watching, listening, and learning. And she could see what the Fair Data Witch could not. This is a really complex issue. See, Data Cat had heard about the witch's plan, and she didn't think it was that simple, so she had undertaken her own investigations. But all throughout the Research Kingdom, scholars and scribes were struggling to actually understand and enact the Fair Witch's complex incantations. The Metadatia scrolls of guidance were long and written in a complex tongue that many didn't understand. And numerous scholars and scribes found themselves lost in the labyrinth of standards, unsure how to begin, and many had to carve out new pathways to find a solution to their particular questions. Others lacked the tools or time to follow her path, and so whilst everyone admired the witch's vision, it was only partially fulfilled. Data Cat knew that she had to tread carefully, however, so she really thought about her next words. She flicked her purple tail and spoke gently. Perhaps the issue is not your vision, but how it's shared. The scrolls of Fair are wise, but they are written in the language of the ancient magic, and many find them hard to follow. Perhaps if we could only explain your magic more clearly with simpler spells, friendlier guidelines, perhaps even some checklists, the scholars would surely understand how to enact them. The witch nodded, her eyes brightening with hope. She saw the wisdom of Data Cat's words and turned to her and said, "Then I ask this of you, dear wise Data Cat. Go forth and pad behind the scholars, help them understand the ways of Fair, not with heavy scrolls, but with a gentle guiding paw. Be their companion in the libraries, their whisper in the potion laboratories, and let them see that Fair is not a burden, but a path to lasting knowledge." Data Cat, filled with purpose, replied, "As you wish, your witchiness, I shall do my best to impart my knowledge to the Research Kingdom, so that everybody can understand how to truly make their data fair." And so Data Cat set out across the kingdom, ready to bring the witch's vision to life. Data Cat visited the data vaults, bustling potion laboratories, and quiet corners of candlelit libraries where lone researchers told. With a soft voice and a patient but firm paw, Data Cat began to explain the witch's vision. So, this is the first part of our story, and I am going to slightly detract away from the narrator so we can actually really hem in on some of these initial issues. So let's talk about the FAIR guidelines. F. F is for findable. Now, I know this is going to sound really dumb, but it needs to exist for people to be able to find it. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I read so many research papers and I think, oh, you know, that data, that code, that sounds really cool. I'd really, really like to look at it. And I can't find any links to it on the paper, because actually a lot of papers say you have to have a data availability statement, but they don't actually mandate that people need to get to that data in the first place, or that it actually needs to exist. You just need to comment on its availability, which, if the availability is that it doesn't exist, isn't very useful. So from an academic perspective, if you want to share this data with people, you should be sharing this data with people. You need to put it somewhere that people can actually get to, and you need to signpost to it. So if you're linking to it, someone needs to be able to actually follow a link and find it. If you're working in industry, you may not wish to share this publicly, but ultimately you should probably still be sharing it with relevant colleagues. So again, it can't just exist within your personal hard drive somewhere with a random name. It needs to actually be somewhere that people can find it. And again, just because you've actually put it somewhere doesn't always mean that it can be findable. Now, you'd hope if you put it in a repository, it will be indexable and searchable. So ultimately, that's where we should be doing that. Or again, if you're from an industry perspective, put it somewhere within a sort of company framework of files that people can actually find it, and provide people with pointers. And check that you're not just linking to one abstract bit of what you're doing. Check that all of the accompanying code, data, lab book entries, anything else that goes with it is also linked to it, so that everyone can find everything that they need. And then A is for accessible. So we need to think about what should and shouldn't be accessible to other people, because not everything should be shared. If you're collecting things that's of personal data, then actually that initial raw data that you've taken and used for analysis, that shouldn't necessarily be shared, but the results should be shared, and the anonymized aggregated data should be shared. And some systems, quite rightly, for example, the UK Data Service, are more complex to retrieve data from than others because they actually hold things that have personal data. But sometimes these things can be quite tricky to access, and you don't necessarily have all the information. So if you're actually putting it somewhere that is embargoed, and you need to actually go and ask permission, or you need to fill in the relevant forms, it's quite important that you actually explain this so people understand how to do this, because that can seem like a huge barrier to entry. So we put it in relevant repositories and places with good metadata, because putting it in a repository, I don't know, for crystallography, if it's all about archaeology, is also not particularly helpful. And then having accessible and human and machine readable metadata. And again, remembering that kind of just because technically you can access it, that doesn't mean it's actually easy for the average researcher to access it. Now, I mean, I could do a whole different webinar on Interoperable, so I'll try and keep this bit short, but ultimately we should be publishing our data in non-proprietary open data formats. Now, I will caveat that obviously that is a very strong academic piece of advice. I would love it if industry also did that, although I appreciate that's not always going to be the case. But I think there's still a worthwhile lesson to be had there, because if you're making it available in something that only you have the software program for, nobody else can actually open it and use it. So you do actually at least need to think about, who do I want to be able to open this and work with it? And it's a real unfortunate thing that a lot of the different software certainly across the physical sciences, and I'm sure across the other subjects I haven't looked into as much yet, have the same problem. But a lot of these software, they don't always open the same types of data formats. So again, having something a bit more universal, or providing, say, something else in just a CSV format, or something that everybody can read alongside that, can be really, really useful. And then having structured and standardized metadata. So it's not just your data that should be interoperable, it's your metadata as well. And I also think that actually having the metadata that links to things like ontologies and taxonomies and the appropriate terms to explain what's in your data and use those common terms is probably the most important, actually, because we need to be able to actually understand. Not everything needs to be in particular formats all the time, as long as you can actually open it. It doesn't necessarily need to be a super fancy linked data format, but it is really important that we can actually look at the metadata and understand this is what's in the data. And again, kind of remembering that even your standards should have standards. You can sort of technically use a particular standard and still do your data badly. You could still use ontologies or taxonomies inappropriately to mean the wrong things. So again, it's kind of being quite mindful of trying to do this accurately and properly. And then reusable. Now, I always think that the R shouldn't necessarily just stand for reusable, because I think there's 4 different types of Rs we should be thinking about. So there is, of course, reuse. So, and you've got to think about the different things you might be doing. So if I write a piece of code, my mentality is probably not that you need to be able to rewrite exactly what I've written, because the whole point is I've written it and I'm sharing it. Whereas, but that does mean you need to be able to use it. So you need to be able to take my code and actually run it. Whereas you might want to replicate something. So if somebody wants to, rerun your whole experiment, replicate it and see if the results change, you need to understand that entire process. Or if you want to reproduce something that somebody's done, again, you need to kind of not just have that starting data, but you need to understand their methodology and what they've done and see if you can actually follow that in the same way. And then if you want to repurpose something, if you want to reuse existing data, existing code and do something else with it, again, you need to kind of have that solid understanding of what it is and have all that information to hand so that you can actually do that. And I just really wanted to also give a note to README and metadata files, because I think that they're both really important and there's an important distinction around it. So your metadata should enable discovery of the data. It should kind of, understand what's in it. So how am I licensed to use this data? What's its title? What's its date? What's it about from a domain perspective? All of that information. But then that doesn't necessarily tell you how to use the data. So I think README should explain how to make the use of the data and then kind of provide some of that additional explanation. So I do think that really the best practice is to have both, and to make sure that you're providing all this relevant information to actually let people make use of your data. So we are now going to continue with the next part of our story. At first, it really seemed like the witch's magic was taking hold. The scholars and the scribes were invigorated with a new understanding of the complexities of FAIR, and they were more determined than ever to put them into practice. But as the moons passed, DataCat began to notice something strange. Despite all of these efforts, many scrolls still vanished into obscurity. Some were shared too late, and others were missing key details, and many were still written in ancient languages, citing spells that nobody else could understand. And even those who embraced FAIR often really struggled to apply it fully. DataCat sat crestfallen beneath a starry sky one evening, too despondent to even eat her tuna, and sighed. Why does it still feel like we're chasing shadows? Where do we go from here? And then suddenly, the penny dropped. As DataCat ventured out across the moonlit corridors, knowing that many of her fellow scholars and scribes would be burning the midnight oil, she began to observe the scholars, working feverishly on creating their new data. She watched as they scribbled notes on scraps of parchment, titled scrolls with names such as Final, Final, Really Final, Version 2, SPK comments, and witnessed firsthand as they almost immediately forgot the spells of yesterday that they had used to conjure their results. And she realised, to truly enact the FAIR vision, we must not start at the end, but we must start where every fairy story begins, at the beginning, where the data is first created. We must teach our scribes and our scholars to weave fairness into their work from the first stroke of the quill. Let them not wait until the scroll is sealed, but guide them as they write, label, and store their data to make data that is fair from its very inception. So ultimately, what I'm trying to get at here is that I think FAIR is great, but it's very end focused. If you think about all the principles that we went through earlier, so the F, the A, and the I, are all about how to enable people to find the data, get to the data, and essentially be able to open up the data, if we take them at their most basic meaning. Now, obviously, the R does stand for reusable, and I've given you my commentary on the other R's. But if we think about the actual principles, they are much more about enabling reuse rather than ensuring it in the first place. It almost feels like FAIR assumes that you have reusable data, and then it tells you what to do with it. And as we start to dig into that and we consider how to provide more information to ensure reusability, that still doesn't make up for poor data. So a lot of issues with data actually start at the collection or creation stage. So I've shockingly worked on numerous data projects, and one that always sticks in my mind is an agricultural project where I was given a load of data sets, and it was my job to standardize terminology across them, to identify ontology and taxonomy terms, to describe them and mark them up in a structured format using the same terminology that somebody who is much, much better at maths than I am could do some clustering and other fancy maths things. But a lot of this data was terrible. So I wasn't just facing the challenge of trying to integrate inconsistent data sets with each other, which in itself was a problem, but they were also wildly inconsistent and incomplete within themselves. So there were cells missing with sort of no explanation of why they were missing. There was no standardized use of units or terms, even sometimes within the same cells. It was absolutely wild. And one of my key conclusions at the end of this project was that we needed better quality data, and that actually a lot of this data had been collected very poorly in the first place. So before we can even think about enacting these sort of FAIR principles for sharing our data, we need to plan our approach properly. So, data management plans are really, really important here. And it's worth noting that at PSDI, Louise and Keris are working on a great data management plan for physical scientists. And there's also a lot of support available via DMP Online to create these. So do go look at those resources. And these should be living documents that you iteratively add to as things change. They should not just be a box ticking exercise. From the beginning, you need to start planning. You need to think about how you're going to collect your data, how you're going to standardize. You need a strategy for missing data. So, you won't always collect everything. But for example, if you run a survey, you might have questions that are dependent on other questions. But you need to capture that, because otherwise, if you just give it to somebody else, you don't have all the information and you just have empty cells, you don't necessarily know why that data isn't there. And you don't know if it's somehow been lost. And then we don't want to run into closed world assumptions where you kind of assume that if you have an absence of something and the first answer was yes, that is necessarily the opposite of that is the no, because it's a whole new category, it's missing. So you need to understand why data might be missing, and you need to have an approach for that. And it's also really important to think about ethics. So if you're doing anything with personal data, chances are you'll need to complete an ethics application, and you need to have given real proper thought to how you're going to manage and organize your data across the entire project, so you can actually ensure it retains that sort of quality and consistency that we're striving for. So if we think about all of these things and put them all together fully, to actually implement FAIR across the entire research data lifecycle includes all of this initial planning stage. So, understanding the ethics and governance, actually collecting or creating it well in the first place. And then once we've actually got this sort of high quality data, I hope, then you also need all the skills required to actually enable reusing the data for others. So such as understanding how to create metadata and align it with appropriate schemas, and understanding actually, where are the relevant repositories for my domain, and what are the best practices for depositing my data in there, and how should I be making my data available via publication. But to go back to our story, whilst that does give us a much better framework to actually think about how to implement FAIR, this did not still solve this deep-rooted and complex problem. Whilst the scholars and the scribes welcomed this new information, and indeed some disparate scrolls started to gleam with clearer labels and shared knowledge, this was not the case across the entire research kingdom. Scholars were tired. They were busy. They were trying and failing to juggle their research with the growing demands of trying to implement all of the aspects of FAIR, some of which they had quite limited knowledge on. Some gave up completely, and others quietly slipped back into old habits, and the shadows began to return. The realization struck DataCat deeply that even with clearer guidance, FAIR could not thrive if it relied solely on the shoulders of individual scholars. To expect every researcher to be a metadata witch, a keeper of standards, and to understand the complex spells of ethics and responsibility, and be a guardian of reusability, is just too much. We need something more. We need more support, more structure, and perhaps a whole new kind of magic. So what is the answer? Well, you may have already worked it out, but to play it out in our story, DataCat sought advice far and wide. DataCat invited representatives from neighbouring lands to discuss this deeply concerning matter. Magical officials came far and wide, including from the mystical realm of libraries, the ever-bountiful kingdom of funding, and the futuristic land of AI. These wise officials gave DataCat their consult, and despite the insistence from the Grand Vizier of the land of AI that their people could magically solve this problem on their own, DataCat realised that this was not an issue that could be solved simply by spells and scrolls alone. No amount of technical magic could replace the need for human care and human guidance. Fairness, DataCat realised, required more than just good intentions. It needed skilled hands and thoughtful minds. However, expecting every researcher to master the full range of FAIR practices on top of their already complex and time-consuming research responsibilities was simply too much. And that's when it struck DataCat what the kingdom needed was data stewards. So they needed people with both domain and technical skills, data skills and knowledge, who could work alongside researchers and help shape their data from the very beginning, serving as collaborators, translators, and caretakers of knowledge to ultimately ensure the quality, accessibility, and usability of data. So if we think back to all these aspects of FAIR that I've been talking about, as I said, if we are to truly enact FAIR, then we need to start at the beginning and work on making data that is actually worth sharing in the first place. And data stewardship is needed across the entire research lifecycle. So this image was shamelessly stolen from the JISC research data lifecycle because it's a great diagram. And what we've tried to do is in part and show you how data stewards would work across these different areas. So, we need people right at the beginning of the sort of planning stage. So to help researchers write their data management plans, as we talked about earlier, thinking about sensible collection and capture processes for data, to ensure this is actually done well from the beginning, because it is so much, I know it's hard, but it is still so much easier to do it right at the beginning than to try and retrospectively fix what has been done wrong. And ultimately, there is only so much you can clean and fix up for inconsistent, incomplete data sets, particularly as time passes. Data stewards can sort of advise on the ethical and responsible research approach, and note importantly where things like ethics applications are needed, and advise on best practices around collaborating, managing, and sharing and storing your data. And then they can actually, also help with this sharing process. So let's sort of, if we think about it temporally, we've actually created some good data. We've kept it consistent and good throughout the project. We've stored it securely. We've shared it with the relevant people. We've collaborated. But now we do have to kind of come back to that FAI part. So, they're going to help with identifying relevant repositories, how you can actually package up your data in a useful and reusable manner, how to document it, how to license it, how to add all the metadata. And again, all these things are really, really important, and they're really, really tricky. And we should not be expecting researchers to do all of this stuff. We should be bringing in people to do all of this stuff. So to address the kind of practicalities, obviously this has been a bit of a fictionalized story to try and explain the complexities of fair data, kind of interwoven with me on my soapbox and some fair data advice. But I mean, ultimately, the conclusion of the story is the reality. So we can't expect researchers to also be masters of data across this life cycle. And we really need data stewards to help with this process. So the role of data steward is slowly becoming established and has been aligned with the research technical professional job family. So this includes things like research software engineers and data scientists. So I mentioned these two particularly because they've actually become quite well established. The University of Southampton described on their data science master's course that data scientist was the sexiest career of the 21st century. I think we need to move on. I think we need to have data stewardship being the sexiest career of the 21st century, but that might just be me. But I mean, ultimately, nobody expects your average researcher to be a software engineer, because you have whole degrees for that. That's a really unique skill set that people need. And you don't expect everybody to have those kind of intense data science skills where they can maybe do really cool stats on your data or really cool quantitative stuff or machine learning. But, doing data stewardship, doing it well, as I've just sort of described, has a hell of a lot of knowledge and a hell of a lot of skills. And, we need to instill in people that actually, if you want that stuff done and if you want your data done properly in your project, that we need data stewards. And therefore, we need to actually bring data stewards into this fold. And, a lot of people are already doing things that fall under the remit of data stewardship, even if it's not necessarily sort of badged under that name, such as librarians and research data management and data curators and stuff. But we are kind of, firstly, woefully short of, actual data stewards. And the role isn't getting the recognition it deserves. So there are a few institutions who are, really leading the way for the UK. So UCL is fantastic. They have a whole set of research technical professionals, and data steward is one of them. But apart from that, in most places, there isn't an obvious transferable career pathway for data stewardship in the same way there is for other more established RTPs. So this is where CASDAR comes in. So CASDAR stands for Careers and Skills for Data-Driven Research, and it is a 4-year Network Plus that has been funded by the UKRI Research Technical Professional Call. And we are going to be running nominally for our first round until the 31st of March, 2029. And it's going to be led out of the University of Southampton. So these are my lovely co-Is, and I am really delighted to say that Louise Saul, who many of you will know in conjunction with UKRN and PSDI, is going to be coordinating this network. It's worth noting, so obviously I'm aware that a lot of the things I've been involved in sit within the remit of the physical sciences, but CASDAR is completely domain agnostic. So we are a network for anyone and everyone across all of the domains, all of the institutions that are interested in data stewardship. And as such, we have an interdisciplinary leadership team, and we have a very lovely interdisciplinary advisory board as well. So we can really try and make sure we have kind of advice across the whole spectrum. And we're also super lucky to have PSDI, the UK Reproducibility Network, Elixir UK, and the Digital Curation Centre as our project partners. And this is our roadmap for the next 4 years, the kind of key 5 things that we want to achieve. So firstly, we want to build a community for data stewards. So at present, there isn't a sort of UK-wide hub for data stewards, and lots are siloed without support, or maybe don't even realise they're doing data stewardship. And we want to provide a place for them to get together and share knowledge and drive us forward. And we want to formally establish these roles of data stewards. So we want to understand the differences, the commonalities, the challenges across different domains, different institutions, different levels. And we do have a lot of knowledge in our team, but we absolutely don't assume that we know everything and we have the full picture. So we really want to adopt this kind of grassroots, learn by doing approach, and funding data stewards across these different roles so we can understand them better. And I have sort of started to nod to this, but we are really passionate about establishing career pathways for data stewards, from entry-level routes all the way through to actually providing that really important path for progression. And we want to foster a culture change whereby data stewards actually appropriately, recognise for their role and their vital contributions. And lastly, we want to put a mechanism in place to ensure that we can actually try and be sustainable so that this can continue after the remit of the grant. These are our 6 deliverables. So in line with our career pathways work, we really want to establish this institutional framework. So demonstrating, the different roles, the different responsibilities of different levels of data stewards, and understand where the overlaps are with other RTP pathways, because that is really important as well. There are definitely some overlaps between different job roles. And I think it's really important for people to have this kind of full holistic view so they can look at their skills, look at, what the entry level things are, what's required of them, where they need to go, and actually understand where they want to sit in that area. And we also want to sort of create a resource repository with examples of lots of different types of data stewardship roles at different levels and with different specialisms. We really want to understand what the skills gap are across the UK, and what training is and isn't available. So I've never seen the point in reinventing the wheel. There are loads of really excellent people working in this area, producing fantastic resources, running good training, working on accreditations, and we absolutely don't want to just reinvent that. So what we're really trying to look at is what's out there in all the different categories. Where can we sort of signpost people to the excellent work everyone else is doing? And most importantly, then what's missing? So where should we then be devoting our efforts? And also, where do data stewards most seem to need upskilling in different areas, so we can kind of make sure we devote our time in the right way? And we're nothing if not self-reflective. We really want to make sure that we're making an impact with CASDAR's work. So we will be conducting a formal analysis to help us understand the impact that we've had. We're going to be granting funding awards to support those data steward positions that I mentioned. And on our sort of sustainability vein, we're going to be setting up a data stewardship association and electing a committee so we can slowly devolve responsibility to them over time, so that hopefully there will be someone to kind of continue that CASDAR torch after 2029. So we're planning an extensive event programme. So we're going to be launching CASDAR on the 18th of September. We're going to run some large-scale data stewards conferences, because ultimately there are some really excellent events. I attended the Step Up conference on Monday. That was fantastic. There were a lot of data steward associate people there, and I attended International Data Curation Conference last year, met loads of really cool data steward people. But there doesn't seem to be one event that just for data stewards to bring everyone together. So we are making that dedicated conference, or we're running the first one of those next year, and hope we provide that really nice space for everyone in that community to convene. And we're also going to be running lots of workshops of sort of knowledge sharing and training in specific areas, but also hackathons and datathons, because ultimately you can learn so much more sometimes through hands-on experience. And I think some of the things I've learned the most about kind of the complexities of things like metadata and semantic web technologies, and one of my many passions, was actually through trying to do it and hacking around with other people's data with other people, because then you sort of experience a lot of those real world issues with other people's data and with your own. I think that's really, really important. And as I said, we're going to be running funding calls. So we're going to launch the sort of timings and some of the details around this first one at our launch event. We're going to support data stewards in kind of 2 different ways. So we're going to have a fixed amount available for universities to bid for kind of small summer intern projects, both to sort of have, give younger people the experience of trying this sort of data steward work. And then also if they're sort of smaller scale projects that need a bit of money and a bit of help, but don't necessarily need this like massive large scale approach, you can bring somebody in to do data stewardship, and also getting someone at, people in at more like data stewardship fellow level. So for longer projects, for those bigger endeavors that actually need a hell of a lot of data stewardship work. So yeah, this will be slashed out in more detail on the 18th of September. And obviously we'll get we have access to a lot of really knowledgeable people in these different areas. So we will be bringing together this sort of expert panel with lots of interdisciplinary experience to review these calls. And then I also wanted to talk a bit about our values and commitments. So kind of I think I've covered sort of recognition and sustainability stuff earlier, but we have others that are really important. So inclusivity is a big one. So we really want to embed EDI across all of our activities and ultimately be as supportive and inclusive as we possibly can. So we want to enable as many people to engage with our network and our events as possible. So we'll be doing a lot of hybrid events. So the launch is going to be hybrid. We're going to be making sure we choose sort of accessible venues and move around, for people that want to attend physically. There will be a bursary fund in place for event attendance. And this isn't just a case of, oh, I need some money to travel. You might need money for support for other things like childcare or other caring responsibilities or other things that, you might need us to help put into place. And I mean, ultimately, if there's a way we can help, ask us. Like I've literally had babies at conferences before. They were very well behaved. They've actually probably been better behaved than some of the participants. So, if there's a way we can facilitate your event attendance, we absolutely will. And we're really committed to promoting responsible research practice. Ethics is again one of my huge passions. I sit on our ethics committee, and it's really, really important that we're upskilling our data stewards and our researchers to understand these ethical principles and make sure that they're doing their research and their data stewardship in an ethical and responsible manner. We obviously want to collaborate and share knowledge wherever we can, and promote these practices across the network, because teamwork is the big thing here. So kind of on that note, this is just a bit of a nod to say we're not the only people doing this. There are lots of other really cool national and international initiatives working on data stewardship specifically, but also working on that kind of broader research, technical, professional pathway. And we're really keen to collaborate. We're already starting to collaborate and talk to a lot of these people. And we are so keen to learn from and collaborate with people in these areas. So, if there are other things I've missed or other things about, please drop them in the chat or drop me a line. Or if you're working on something that you don't think I'm aware of, please tell me, because we really want to have this kind of widest spread of knowledge as possible. So finally, almost finished, I promise. But please save the date for our town hall launch. It's going to be on the 18th of September. So very conveniently, it's one day after the PSDI showcase. And it's going to be held at exactly the same location, so Birmingham Library. So this felt like probably the right audience for people who might be interested in attending both. So there is a good 2-for-1 opportunity to only have to come to Birmingham once, and you can attend both of our events. So at our launch, we're going to be hosting sort of stories from different data stewards or people working in these data stewardship areas at different levels, different institutions. There'll be an opportunity to hear about a lot of different related data stewardship and RTP initiatives, and also sort of what our partners are doing in this area. There'll be networking, there'll be opportunities to discuss key issues in 8 areas around data stewardship. Also a chance to provide us with feedback around things like priorities and community need. And obviously, as I mentioned, we will be providing more details about the funding call. And there'll be an opportunity to bring posters or present lightning talks if you're doing something relevant to data stewardship and you want more people to find out about it. So here are all of our details. So please sign up to our mailing list and follow us on social media to get kind of all of the latest updates on our activities. We're going to be releasing signups for the launches soon. I would like to note that my website is currently still in development, but it will be up soon. So don't be alarmed if that doesn't work. And believe me, we will be shouting all over social media when it's ready. And most importantly, if you were still on the fence about following us or signing up to the mailing list, we'll be shortly unveiling our new mascot. So as a hint, she's really cute, really fluffy, has a tail. I think she'll get on fantastically with Shark Cat, and I'll leave you all to imagine what animal we might have picked for this mascot. And I'd just like to acknowledge all of my CASDAR team. The proposal would not have gone through without them, and also members of PSDI, so particularly Louise, Nikki, Keris, Eileen, Jeremy and Matthew for the extensive discussions that we've had about fair data that have kind of helped me put a lot of these opinions into perspective. So I've been thinking about this for a long time. And an extra shout out to Matthew because he drew the Air and Science cartoons that have been featured along this presentation. And also he's designed our new mascot. So he deserves a big thumbs up. So thank you so much for listening. I really hope you found this useful and informative. And I hope you enjoyed the adventures of DataCat. I can't take credit for the artwork, sadly. All of the other pretty pictures come from Canva, which is a really nice presentation tool. And yeah, thank you. And if you have any questions, I'm really happy to answer them.
Thank you, Samantha, for a really insightful and thought-provoking presentation. I actually have one for you. What is your ideal vision for data stewardship? Like, if you could imagine the perfect research environment where data stewardship is fully part of the research culture, what would that look like, or how would it work on a day-to-day basis?
I'm going to caveat this with, I do appreciate that financially my vision is a bit out there, but I think there's no harm in being ambitious. My true ambition for data stewards would be that actually every university follows that UCL model. So every university has a full breadth of research technical professionals, that we have a proper career matrix that explains all of the different roles and all the different areas so that people can really get into these careers and be properly supported, have proper progression through them, and that they can have stable, permanent jobs, because actually every institution recognizes that this isn't something you should just bring in and out, that we should actually have formally full-time employed, data stewards, data scientists, research software engineers. I guess my vision kind of goes for the whole set of RTPs, and that also every research project would have minimum of one data steward, and I guess would have an appropriate amount of data stewardship for the breadth and scale of the project, and the funding calls would basically have a mandate that, much like we currently put things, you have to say what you're going to do with your data, you have to say how you're going to manage it, you have to justify your finances, you have to say how you're going to be ethical and responsible. I would say for that you would have to have your data stewardship model in there, and the fact that you were going to have somebody do data stewardship. So I do appreciate that is quite ambitious. That's my pipe dream, but I'm also really hoping that CASDAR can at least start to sort of push towards some of that vision.
Suggest some case studies where researchers can talk about their research before data stewardship and research with data steward, and one needs to see the benefits with and without data stewardship. That is kind of a suggestion.
That's amazing. I absolutely will be. In fact, I think using our funding call will be a really good opportunity for that as well, but also getting people to come in and talk to the community about that. But I think we can definitely also use our funding call as a sort of complete showcase of that, because we can get people to highlight where their projects were before we brought in data stewards and funded them to help, and then what that looked like afterwards. And yeah, I'm really excited to see that progression, because I think I'm really hoping that will start to bring forward why this is so important.
Also, like data stewardship as a service, like you're considering that also.
Yeah, we have absolutely talked about the notion of like rent a data steward. So have lots of data stewards, and then you come in and you say, I've got need, I'm doing this sort of project, because again, I think it's really important to have a kind of diverse collective of data stewards, because all the skills we talked about, obviously, I think it's very possible for someone to have knowledge of, I guess, all of the kind of basics at quite a good level. But I think once you start getting into the intricacies of certain things, like I expect people to have a knowledge of licensing, for example, but you can get into a really complex, deep licensing issues. I'm not sure I'd expect everyone to have all of that. I'd almost expect everyone to have a kind of fundamental level knowledge, and then we would have, licensing specialists, ethics specialists, but then also domain specialists as well, like having a real in-depth knowledge of how to manage, say, some of the chemistry data versus psychology data or social science data. That's quite different. It projects across physical science and sociology and agriculture, and that was all quite different. So yeah, I think it'd be a really fantastic thing to have.
I believe University of Southampton is part of SEPNet, Southeast Physics Network. Perhaps we could discuss a collab idea based on interns in our NHS hospital.
Fantastic. Definitely. Yeah, drop me a line. We should definitely chat about that. And yes, we are part of SEPNet, because actually when we did PSDI internships last summer, we ran 1 or 2 through SEPNet. So I think, and again, it'd be really cool to make sure we have all these different disciplinary angles. And yes, NHS data definitely feels like something that needs a lot of stewardship.
I think that's all the questions.
So really exciting. PSDI has launched V1. So yay! It's an amazing achievement, and I mean, everyone has done absolutely fantastic work, but we now have lots and lots of really cool stuff for you to come and look at, and we would really appreciate your feedback. So we have lots and lots and lots of data sets available. So we folded all of the data sets from the Physical Sciences Data Science Service into PSDI, and we've also made quite a lot of other data sets available. We've got a lot linked in with the Optimade API, and we've got a lovely fancy cross-search service that will allow you to sort of search holistically across a load of these different different data sets. And we have also produced, so some of the team have done excellent work in producing additional kind of highly curated, specific, trusted data sets we think will hopefully be really useful to researchers. So we've also got quite a lot of different cool tools for your data. So again, PSDI is all about kind of helping you manage your data in the best way possible and connecting together different data and different tools. So we've provided lots of things to try and help you with your data. So notable ones, I mean, I'm going to mention this because it's my baby, but the data conversion service, which will allow you as kind of your one-stop shop for scientific data conversion. So you can convert between lots and lots of different scientific file formats. We've also got the data revival service, so that'll allow you to scan in like PDFs or paper lab books entries, and it'll turn it into machine readable content and pull out the chemistry aspects for you. We've also got lots of Galaxy workflow tools. We've got lots and lots of really cool things. We also have our knowledge base, which is made by the wonderful Keris. So that has a whole host of useful resources on it. So we've got lots of guidance around different areas. So things about fair data, actually things about choosing relevant tools, so things like electron lab notebooks. We've got links to our self-paced training. We've got some tutorials on RO-Crate, and we've also got some Moodle courses around, again, lots of different aspects of sort of data and scientific skills. So things around coding, things around version control, things around data and ethics. And we also have links to some of our case studies as well. So case studies on resurrecting legacy data and the lessons we've learned from that. And also slowly adding case studies on the work we've done, looking at different electron lab notebook implementations. We're collaborating with lots and lots of different people already. So there is probably if you go on the slide on the website, there's definitely going to be a link somewhere, but we have all of these different collaborators. Like most recently, we've been collaborating with the DCC Digital Creation Centre to run a PSDI data roadshow. So that's been really, really fun. And we are also, we're not just an infrastructure that provides you with website and tools and data. We are so much more than that. We're also all about the community. So we are continuing, it's not just the webinars we run, but we are continuing to run a whole host of events because we really want to bring the community together. We want to understand how PSDI can help you and how we can help your data. So again, massive shout out to the showcase, because that's going to be on the 17th of September in Birmingham Library, and you can come along and find out all about our different tools, all about our different data, all the things we've got up there. And I really, really hope that you'll provide us with as much feedback as possible. We're here to serve you as the community, so please tell us if there are things you notice that you're like, oh, why haven't you done that? Or it'd be really great if you did this. We want to hear those suggestions. And also we're working on a few different sort of specific community angles of our own. So PSDI is also very invested in data stewardship, specifically obviously around the physical sciences, and we've run quite a lot of data steward workshops because we're trying to understand those sort of unique data needs for the physical sciences. And we're also working very hard to sort of re-establish this old electronic research notebooks community. So some of you might have recently seen, I put out on LinkedIn, we've got a new page with the logo drawn by the wonderful Keris. So this is for everyone that's interested in research notebooks, whether that's electronic or otherwise. And we're going to be hosting some events and also revamping some of the original work that Valerie McCutcheon has done and pulling together a lot of case studies and examples, because this is a really big issue, and this is something, again, I'm super passionate about because I love this whole journey around implementing electron lab notebooks. So yeah, there's a lot of different things we're working on here, and yeah, please come and check out all of our resources and provide us with feedback.
Thank you. We are wrapping up, so just like to reiterate what Samantha was saying, we have the PSDI showcase on the 17th, so you can register using this link or scanning this QR code. You can also find us on all of the major social media platforms, and all the webinars and past webinars you can find on our YouTube channel. You can also join our JISC mailing list, so you can get all the updates we are about to publish. Finally, a very big thank you again for Samantha. Thank you all once again for joining us, and very big thank you for the excellent presentation. Wishing you all a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you in another PSDI event.